Hello everyone, it's Coach Robert, and I'm going to be talking about a common mistake that people make when they're playing black against d4, and some specific opening theory that's related to playing bishop f5 too early. Now this generally will happen when people are new to chess and they're just starting to learn opening theory, because they want to play black the same way that they play with white. So they'll usually go ahead with symmetrical kind of play, and maybe they've learned by now that taking on c4 requires a lot of theoretical knowledge, and so they just support their pawn. But they want to develop their bishop in the same way that they might with white, by playing bishop f5. This is a pretty intuitive guess at how black should play if you just learned how to play the game. But it turns out that this move has some downsides. Usually you will not be punished for playing bishop f5 unless you're playing a rather strong opponent, since the refutation of this move requires some advanced play. But I also don't recommend playing bishop f5 in general against the d4 opening for people who just learned how to play, because I noticed that starting players usually don't defend very well against the move queen b3, either immediately or after c takes d5. But we're going to be talking about c takes d5 here, and the logical basis of this problem for black is that they're a move behind in their development, and when they play bishop f5, white's on the move, so they can play queen b3 and harass the b7 pawn immediately. And there's no really good way to deal with it, so we'll look at a couple of things. Before we do, though, I just want to mention that e6 is perfectly fine for black, and after e6 we could see like maybe bishop g5, or maybe e3, or maybe g3, or maybe c takes d5 and this Carlsbad structure. So if you are playing black here and you don't want to be left high and dry after I've destroyed your favorite bishop f5 move, you should try looking at e6 and the positions that result from there. It's pretty common in the opening for black to have to accept having a blocked in bishop on at least one color in order to complete their development securely. So it's not that big of a deal. You just have to learn some openings to deal with it. Anyway, so the issue of bishop f5, right? It weakens b7, and if white plays very actively, they can capitalize on this, and here's how. First, they should take on d5. The reason for taking on d5 immediately is that we want the d pawn to be a target as well. We want to make it so that black has to defend not just the b7 pawn, but also the d5 pawn. And so this is preparing to play queen b3. Now, once they take back, we can go ahead with queen b3 and target b7. Before we talk about how black might defend this, I just want to mention that black has an alternative. They can play the move knight takes d5, and here our response is the same. It's still queen b3. The reason that e4 isn't working, it looks like a double attack. You can pause the video and try to solve it yourself if this is a little bit challenging for you. But the key factor is that they can take on c3 with tempo, because it attacks the queen. This gain of time for black is critical because it allows them to take the pawn on e4 for free. So this is not why you should not take with the knight. Many people might intuitively think that's the case and just avoid knight takes d5 by pure intuition. But the real reason that you should avoid knight takes d5 is that after queen b3, there's a long forced line that leads to an endgame that's favorable for white, which is the same as in the main line. Here's just a sample. After queen b6, to protect the b7 pawn, we are going to play the move, and if you want to pause here, this is also a good exercise. How are we going to try to win a pawn? It's with knight takes d5. This is just like in the main line. It's the same kind of tactical motif, but in a couple different move orders, you'll see. After queen takes b3, the key to securing an advantage is to throw black off balance with knight c7. Keep in mind, though, that we have to take our queen back, so we are not actually winning the rook, but the threat of winning the rook will win us additional time for white to complete their development ahead of black. So they have to play king d8, which also ruins their castling, although I don't think it's very important once the queens are off the board. But once they've played king takes c7, we can develop with tempo by playing bishop f4. This extra move of development is really critical for securing a small advantage for white. After king c8, which keeps in touch with the knight and the b7 pawn, we're going to see knight d2, which reroutes the knight to some better squares and also prepares to gain more space with the move e4. So after knight d7, which makes sense since this knight has no other moves to play, e4 bishop g6 and bishop e2 leaves white, in my opinion, much better. So that refutes the move knight takes d5 in this position, right here. There's basically no alternative along the way. You can play it out yourself on the board, or against an engine that's near your level, or against a friend, to try to figure that out yourself, if you're not convinced. Anyway, so after queen b3, so after pawn takes d5, they should take back with the pawn for the greatest challenge to white. But we're going to do the same thing. Queen b3 targets the b7 pawn and the d5 pawn, and it turns out that it's quite difficult to guard it all. So queen b6 is usually what people are going to choose here. Bishop c8 is not really logical, because it leaves white much better in development. White doesn't need really any special preparation for what to do here. They just are ahead on moves and can play pretty naturally. It's worth mentioning that queen c7 is not as accurate as queen b6. So here you could also pause if you want to give yourself a bit of a strategic or tactical exercise here. The best move for white is bishop f4. And the idea here is to develop a tempo, because if they go ahead and accept this free-looking bishop, we can play queen takes b7 and the rook on a8 is ours. And we should have a really nice position at that point. So not that. And similar to bishop c8, if they just play b6, this is a really nice position for white. The light squares are really weak, and it doesn't require any special play. So queen b6 is the challenge, and here is also a good moment to pause and see if you can spot some tactics. It's similar to the line where we took on d5 and they played knight takes d5. Here we're going to play knight takes d5, and if they play knight takes d5, we should be really happy to play queen takes d5, even though we're giving up a couple of moves to secure this extra pawn. After e6, queen b3, we're cruising into an endgame, and I think this is black's biggest challenge, to double the pawns. We're cruising into an endgame where we're just better. The way that we can develop our pieces is pretty natural. This is protecting our weakness, attacking the center and the e6 pawn, just all around good square for the bishop. And we can play a move like bishop d2, and probably keep our king centralized, since this is an endgame. There's no need to necessarily castle, but I don't see any harm in castling either. So anyway, queen takes b3 is the move here, if black is trying to be very challenging. But after knight takes f6, we don't have to worry about our hanging knight on d5 anymore, because this is check, so they have to take back. And now they have doubled pawns. That could be useful to white in the endgame as well. But it does accelerate black's development, which is why I think this is the most challenging line for black. And after a takes b3, bishop c2 is a way that black can try to recover their lost pawn. But it turns out they have bigger problems than being down material, because they can have that pawn back. After bishop d2, bishop takes b3, e4, white has a major space and development advantage, and the a7 pawn is a permanent weakness, because we can just keep pressuring it, and in order for them to secure the pawn on a7, they'll have to move it to like a6, and that would weaken the b6 square. So I think white really has a lot to look forward to in this line. So I consider this the refutation for the move bishop f5 in the Slav on this particular move, move 4. And you might say, what's the big deal? White wins a pawn, or they get a lot of development or extra space. But if you don't believe me and you don't think white's better, you should play this position against a computer that you consider near your level and see how it goes. I think that would be a really good exercise in general, and it would show you, if you're taking the black side, to say, just for sake of argument, that maybe black's not so badly off. You'll probably learn a lot from seeing what kinds of middle game continuations arise from that position. Alright, well, I hope you liked that, and you can look forward to more opening tidbits and other similar things on my channel. So until next time, take care, and good luck with your chess.